Hey, good morning, everybody. Here we are at DEMOFEST 2022, third year in a row. Excited to have everybody. I'd like to welcome everybody from all over the world. We're getting a lot of you chatting in where you're coming in from, so it's fun to see that. And just want to welcome you, especially those who have been with us for our first customer day yesterday at DEMOFEST. Welcome to day 2, but to all the rest of you, especially first day welcome on the general sessions of DEMOFEST, the Sales Engineering Virtual Conference. As I said, this is our third year, and it's been a real pleasure for us to put this on each year. And I don't know if you've heard about how many people are attending, but we've had over 4,000 people, sales, pre-sales and sales professionals, primarily pre-sales professionals, register for this conference. So very excited about that. I want to start by just explaining that we've got a great session coming up. Alastair Woolcock, the Chief Strategy Officer from Revenue.io, which we'll introduce more formally in just a minute, will do our keynote, and we're very pleased to have him join us. And the sessions today and all of DEMOFEST, just as by way of introduction, if you're not familiar with Consensus, DEMOFEST is hosted and sponsored by Consensus. And Consensus is intelligent demo automation software that helps scale pre-sales through interactive video demos. So we really love to help provide thought leadership in the industry and appreciate all of you presenters that are joining us in more than 50 sessions this year from many different organizations and areas. So thank you for that. Before we get into the session this morning, we have an important bit of a special invitation that we want to make. So at Consensus, we help sponsor a couple of humanitarian organizations, and as you've noticed, we have not charged a registration fee for DEMOFEST, and we hope that you get a ton of value from this. We want to encourage you to join us in donating to a couple of humanitarian organizations, and I'm going to invite our Director of Design, David Lindus, to share a few things with us about these organizations and why you might want to join us in participating with that.
Thanks, Karen. Hi, everyone. First of all, I want to thank Consensus for the example they've already set in giving to these organizations. And I want to tell you that I have a personal interest in both of them. Both of them right now are focused in projects in Guatemala, which is my home country. I was born there and I came to the US at the age of 9. Let me tell you a little bit about what each of these orgs is up to. The first one is a preschool in the Western Highlands in the department of Sololá in Guatemala. They have 24 preschool students. And it's this actually really beautiful little preschool that was formed during COVID, when many teachers in particularly the highlands of Guatemala lost their jobs because school was not in session. This org hired one of those preschool teachers, and they started hosting preschool classes in their backyard, outdoors, where students could be safer and more distant from one another. And that was kind of the beginning of this little preschool class. Now it is run largely by parent volunteers. Mind you, many of these parents do not read or write, and they're learning a lot with their children as they volunteer at this preschool. The giving opportunity here is a sponsorship per child. Each child receives both educational and nutritional support, and you can visit our site at goconsensus.com/donate to donate to that org. Now, the second org I'm going to tell you about, I know a lot more about. I am a member of the board of L5 Empowerment, and so I have a lot more info on this particular project. This is Gloria. front and center. She is an amazing leader. She leads a women's organization in the town of Chiquimula, Guatemala, which is in the eastern, more arid region. Her women's org has been solving community problems for years now. She knows her community. She is well known among her community, and she has done great work for a long time. Gloria's org told us they had a challenge. They were spending a large amount of their income buying or collecting water during the dry season, which is more or less equivalent to winter in the northern hemisphere. So when I say there was a water shortage, I mean it. In this squatter settlement where most of the women live, there is no formal access to water other than these public spigots that are shared by a couple hundred people each. And those public spigots were getting 2 hours of water per month. Okay? So, Gloria's idea was to have residential rainwater collection systems installed in every one of her women members' homes. And that is what they've done. All L5 Empowerment has done is be a lender of last resort. This is some photos of some of these systems that have been installed already. Now, how does that help? Not only do these rainwater collection systems collect rainwater when it rains, but what happens when it doesn't? When it doesn't, they can still serve these big tanks that you saw on the last slide. They can still serve to store water. So you could store water from that public spigot in these tanks. You could store water even that you buy or gather into these tanks. And previously, that storage ability wasn't there. So one of the results has been that their 2021 to 22 dry season had a stellar harvest. It made national news in Guatemala. The next step, and this was again Gloria's leadership and Gloria's idea, is a well. It means greater access to water during that dry season, and it presents a monetization opportunity for the women's org. They can begin to sell water. Combined with the tanks that they already have for storage, this creates a really stellar system of access to water and storage during those dry months. What does this mean? It means that we are raising 60,000 US dollars to dig and equip a well. I don't want you to feel overwhelmed by this number. If each of our registered participants here at DEMOFEST gave 15 US dollars, we would be funded by the end of this event. So this is very doable. This is not a hero project. You can help. With L5, all of these funds are given to the org as a loan. So a loan is extended, the project is carried out, the loan is repaid with a small amount of interest to be sustainable. We don't have an overhead. We're small and volunteer operated. So 100% of your donation goes to the project. And we have real local leadership. I met with these women a week ago. I was in Guatemala as part of this project, and I can tell you these ladies know what they're doing. And as soon as they have the loans that they need, they can move forward and work miracles with very little. So please join us. Go to goconsensus.com and donate. Thank you.
Well, thanks a lot, David. I really appreciate you sharing that and appreciate the connections you've helped us make with these organizations. I just want to encourage each of you to, if you don't have to do it right now, but if you could, if you find value in participating in DEMOFEST this week, please just consider using some of the money you might have spent on a registration fee, which we're not asking you to spend, to contribute to this. Now, if you go out to this website, you'll see a donate button. When you click on that, it'll take you to what may look like a bit of a sketchy page. And we had some issues. We had a really nicely designed collection form for the actual donation. that matched everything, but it was having some issues from just a compatibility standpoint across browsers. So we went with just the basic form that comes from the. I just want to encourage you that if you go out there and you see this and it looks like a sketchy form, it actually is real. It's authorized.net. It's going to work fine. It is fully secure and all of that. But just wanted to give you a heads up that it won't. That form, when you actually put in to do the donation, won't have the same styling as the original page. So I would encourage you again to go out and donate. And the other thing that you can do is if you like either one of these organizations, you'd rather donate to one more than the other, because what we're going to do is we're going to take the donations that we get and split them evenly. If you'd rather support one more than the other, feel free to go out to the individual organizations, which there's some links there, and you can donate on their page if that would be more comfortable or anything like that. So just want to use the platform and community that we have to try to help these great organizations and the work they're doing. So
there's an important question, Garen, real quick in the comments here. Is this a registered nonprofit? The answer is yes. The name of the last nonprofit, the second project I shared with you, is called L5 Empowerment, to answer Ajit Kadari's question in the comments.
Yeah, thank you. Well, thanks again, and appreciate it, David. We're going to move on now to the keynote, and I'm going to welcome John Cook to the stage here. And John is our Director of Communications at Consensus. His team that's responsible for putting on DEMOFEST. So I want to just give a big shout out to John and everybody on his team and in the marketing department in general for putting this great conference on. So thanks so much, John. And John's going to run through some housekeeping things and then introduce our keynote speaker.
Thanks, Garen. Oh man, it's so exciting to be getting going on this first publicly available day. So welcome everybody. I just want to run through a couple of housekeeping items. We encourage you to participate in today's session, and on the right side of your console, you can see a few ways to engage with us throughout the session. So the chat function will allow you to engage with us as well as other attendees. And throughout the session, you may see a few polls. We encourage you to participate as your feedback is very important to us. We're loving those polls. And you'll see our speaker will be taking questions from the audience at the end of the session. But we do encourage you to ask questions through the Q&A box at any time. Also, if at any time you have some technical difficulties, you can toggle to your profile in the upper right corner and click Get Support. All right, with that done, I'd like to introduce our speaker today. Alastair Woolcock is the Chief Strategy Officer at Revenue.io, where he guides the future of end-to-end revenue production by focusing on sustainable growth. And prior to joining Revenue.io, he was a VP Analyst with Gartner. That's where we kind of became acquainted with Alastair and a lot of his work there. He covered the revenue technology categories globally. He has presented and created thought leadership in the RevTech space in the US, the EU, APAC, the Middle East, and has appeared in the Wall Street Journal, CIO Magazine, and Business Wire. And with that, I will turn the time over to you, Alastair.
Thanks, John. Welcome, everybody. I'm very excited to be at this year's DEMOFEST. We're going to dive in today to the conversation around helping sellers sell and buyers buy. But I want to frame something up for you first, right out of the box. And that is, let's look at engagement. Engagement, how much time are we all getting these days with our buyers? Because for all of the investments and all of the technology, it is often one of the most basic things that drives revenue, and that is the interactions that we have. And that is exceptionally true for pre-sales engineering and the value that is brought to the table. So as you think about that question, go, well, how much time do we think we get? Is it 60% of a buyer's cycle, of a sales cycle? Is it 40%? That'd be getting pretty low. There are a few pessimists out there. They're going, no, it's not even close to that. It's 25%. Well, the number is 17%. 17% is the amount of time that an average buyer today is spending in all of their buyer journey with vendors as they're being engaged and supported. They're going out to other places for thought leadership. They're using digital assets throughout. They're now using microsites and other things all the time. They're engaging with third-party firms for advice, like where I used to be, Gartner. And so understanding this is really important, because when we engage, it isn't just about doing what we used to do and then, oh, how do I get there? What we do when we engage has fundamentally changed. It's much more around supporting a buyer and all of what they need to complete, rather than the idea that we're going to come on and actually sell them. And it sounds counterintuitive, but it is where the market is going. And if that isn't bad enough, and a little discouraging as a way to start, unfortunately, this is a real impact to quota attainment. Realize today that 2/3 of all professional sales reps are missing their quotas. 2/3. A third sit roughly between 0 and 50%. Another third sit between about 50 to 80%. And then the final third are doing 80% plus. That's a problem in growing and developing our businesses. And so, if we thought it's very hard to sell right now, which it is, it's more competitive than ever, it's also actually equally as hard to buy. And this is a really important thing to consider when we think about buyer enablement and how that works and the task orientation there. Because as a buyer, you are selling to me. I have to go convince a lot of other people in my organization and get them on board with me these days. In fact, for deals below $1 million, average buying group size is around seven people, and actually grows to 13 at over $1 million plus. And I want to give you an analogy here of what's going on. Have any of you ever played that kids game where you have young children, where they play that game called telephone? You know, the one where we say one thing into one person's ear and we pass the message all the way around the table, and we see what comes out the other end, and we generally laugh because it's completely different. Well, that's exactly what a buyer is trying to do with these buying groups. We target a sponsor, we get great marketing qualified leads, our SDRs and ISRs follow up, they qualify something through, we eventually get a sales approved lead, we then get our sellers qualifying maybe through a process, eventually we get to demos, we get to the pre-sales engineering and all of this through our 1, 2, or 3 people that we actually engage with in an account. 2 to 3 is the typical norm. And those 2 to 3 people have to go get the rest of this buying committee on board. And largely, they're trying to solve the game of telephone. They're trying to convince everybody else the problem, how they can solve it, and what they're trying to do. And if we aren't helping solve that game of telephone by supporting the buying tasks systematically at every stage with the buyer and not letting our sales process dictate what we do, we'll be in trouble. And by the way, you think about this, and the irony of all of it is that over 3/4 of all buyers say, you know what? It's actually kind of hard to buy from vendors. And yet you think of all of us, I don't know of any vendor worldwide that attempts to make it difficult to buy from themselves. They want to engage, they want to help, but there's a massive disconnect between what the buyers need and what we do and how we engage. Now, these buyers as well, also, they use a lot more areas and channels than they were used to before. In 2016, it was around 5 different channels they used. Most of those are pretty common, still used today. By 2019, we're up to about 7.5. Still pretty manageable, right? We added a little bit more. Yes, some mobile things came in, more event-based came in 2019, but then, of course, the world changed with the pandemic. And now as of 2022, that number is actually sitting at 10, double what it was in 2016. Think of all of the other places where people are going and how do we engage and how do we support them and how do we scale the engineering side, the pre-sales side, and some of the most lucrative engagement in these accounts. Yes, video is now front and center, like what we're doing right now, but micro portals, the more dependency on mobile app from where they're going and how they're looking at things. They're looking at demos broken down into bite-sized chunks, and they're trying to share that across their organization. And then you sit there and go, where are we going to be by 2025? Low side 12, high side, we're probably looking at a number probably closer to about 15 within the next 36 months. 15 different places people are going. And we're talking some pretty interesting things now with virtual selling rooms. We're talking about the advancement of where demo rooms will actually have digital assistants inside them, guiding and helping buyers all the way. This notion that always on pre-sales, right? 24/7 availability, instant chat functionality. This is where we are headed. This is what buyers need from us today. But it's been pretty hard in pre-sales, and it's had a pretty big impact to us in this sales engineering world. Like, number one, demo volumes are at all-time high because buyers are now able to book and click and get to engineers. They're getting to the demo side and they're jumping to demos and relentless demos. Could you just do another one? Could we get another department? Could I get somebody else from my buying group involved? It's all good for engagement, but it does make for a very expensive cost of revenue. Then we see time to value requirements are down massively. Time to value is one of the most important factors that buyers use today when evaluating vendors, and it is down to less than 90 days. For context, 2019 before, on average, you could be 9 to about 18 months in terms of the time to value of what you were doing for an organization. They're now looking for things in the 60, 90-day window. How can I light up your service and solution? And how can I get value to my business for the problem we agree we're solving in a quarter? That means really breaking down these problems into smaller chunks. These things are leading to also lower conversion rates. You realize we are spending more on technology than ever before. Sellers are selling less. They do more work. There's more insights and things that we have, and yet we're converting less. And our buyers, as a result of now the access to so much information, so much comparable information, and all the channels they're using, we're finding that they are cooking up and creating additional projects beyond what they were thinking. So it's actually even more competition, often coming from internal, not just your classic competitors. This is a real conundrum for pre-sales. And so, first thing I want to advise you on today is, well, what are some basic tactics that pre-sales and sales engineering can do to mitigate some risk? There's kind of 4 basic things that, by the way, if any of these things occur, you almost certainly are just going to get clients to disengage. And this elongates sales cycles. Right at the top of the list is they're looking for contextualized experts around the business situation they're in, and then have some domain vertical knowledge. It isn't good enough anymore simply to be an expert on a technology. While buyers have always believed they are unique, most of us would believe we're unique individuals. But the reality is the need to understand precise situations and problems and how that applies to vertical competitiveness and what they are doing as an organization is critical. Number 2, compliance and security risk seems like an obvious thing that we would address, but 67% of the time, it is overlooked by both the buyer and the seller until way late in the sales stage. This creates a problem for us. So sales engineering and pre-sales needs to talk through not just the compliancy and security risk of what you have built and what you represent as a company, but the causality of it on the organization. Me as a buyer, what's the ripple effect on my compliance and my risk posture? Number 3, super tactical, but again, often missed. And this actually ranks for mid-funnel development and sales engineering expectations. This is actually number 1 from buyers today. They are saying, you know what, there's a real lack of implementation plans and guidance coming from vendors. And we're not talking the flippant kind of, oh, well, we have an implementation plan. Here it is, download, install, we'll support you, get success. No, they're looking for the detailed, dare I say, RACIs. I'm not the biggest fan of RACIs, but to that level of understanding for their uniqueness and what they're doing. Even in a fast-paced SaaS company that might be PLG-led, how are we helping with digitized implementation plans, access to that information? Sales engineering needs to take ownership of that step and ensure it happens as a task. Be proactive on that. And then be real aware of POC fatigue. And what I mean by this is think of the classic demo meeting. It's 30 minutes, maybe an hour long. It's got a bunch of welcome stuff at the beginning. Then we got a salesperson that comes up and makes a joke, settles the room, does some high-level jargon around why we're all there. And you got maybe half a dozen people on that meeting at that point. We're already 15 minutes in and nobody's actually dealt with what we came here for, which is the demo. And then, by the way, from there, we got a demo that goes through a fairly canned process for the next 30 minutes, of which nobody is really engaging because they're picking out key points they want instead of because they don't need the whole thing. And then we try to drive some QA follow-up and book some more meetings. And like, I don't need more meetings. That entire thing, I only got 10 minutes of value out of it. So think about how you can break the demo process and POC process into bite-sized chunks, which are hyper-personalized by role. Don't make the goal anymore maximum number of people in a meeting and drive a demo or drive pre-sales engineering conversations. Break them apart into bite-sized chunks with individuals. Hyper-personalization is the future. Failure to address these can add as much as 2.6 months to almost any buyer journey. And in that 2.6 months, additional vendors get involved. That's competition. And on top of that, more projects come up internally, internal competition. So these are all basic things we can address today. Now, the other final one here on the tactical front, build a business case. For any of you that sell to line of business buyers, which now, by the way, represents over 43% of all IT spend. Non-IT spend, it represents as much as 80 to 90%, depending on what you're doing. 92% of the time, a business case is needed. You cannot overlook this step. And by the way, the business case is not the thing that engineering and sales presents at the close of a deal. If you are not helping build a business case at front of the funnel development with your buyers, you are not supporting them correctly. Short form business case up front, long form validation at the end. This is a critical step that helps a buyer buy. It helps them get their buying groups online. So how do we do this even more? This all requires this very notion of what we called the session around helping buyers buy and not just the sellers sell. Well, let's look at this from a task-based perspective. So buyer enablement is the very concept that it's not so much going through a sales process in a linear way. It is the acknowledgement that there's a series of tasks that buyers have to complete as they move through their evaluation of solving a problem. And here I've drawn up an illustrative example of problem identification all the way through consensus agreement, right? And in this, what you'll find is that buyers are thinking this in terms of things they need to do in these basic buckets. They don't necessarily think of it progressionally. They just go, these are all the things I have to get done. It's like a game of whack-a-mole. And then, remember, they're trying to look at this across a larger group in their organization. So each time you see a task, ask yourself, is it shareable? Is it contextual? Is it something that they can take away to the rest of the buying committee? Because it isn't, remember, we're only getting 17% of the buy time, of the engagement time. So we got to think about how we're supporting that. And so as we break this apart, what I want you to think through today is how we continuously validate and how we create consensus across tasks at every step as we go. And what I've done here is really kind of given you, a bit of the view of all of these things that happen, and they happen bi-directionally, right? We're having personalized moments across solution exploration stage, which may mean that we have to drive, even though we may be at the sales engineering and or the direct engage with the client, but we need to do some personalized marketing coming out of that. We better be feeding that back through. There's going to be different guidance moments where there's gap analysis around different buying groups coming online further on when we're at the requirements building stage. And that may mean that we're moving backwards while we're also selling forwards. This is a big mess. It's hard to do. So thinking in task orientation is a great way to solve this problem, because all of this requires real-time data, real-time synchronization. And this is where we need to be understanding these buyer moments and learning from what they need at each step. So I built you out a bit of a cheat sheet here today. And by no means is this exhaustive, but I just want to give you some really basic examples of what I mean by tasks that we can do and look in terms of the seller side versus the buyer side on the top. And a problem identification. What's a buyer trying to do? They might be looking at you, 3, 4 other competitors. You're all actually solving the problem, but you solve it slightly differently. So they're trying to validate what's going on and which is the best fit. They're trying to validate the claims that are being made. Now, that doesn't mean being the loudest person and saying, well, what we claim is better or more truthful. Vendors generally don't lie. It simply just shifts of perspective of how to solve a problem. And that's what you want to help the buyer discern and understand. That's where the trust of pre-sales and the engineering side comes in. And then, the seller hopefully is identifying that same vendor claim issue across the buying group, because different buyers inside the organization have different requirements. And so help quantify the benefit of action. That's a great way to earn trust and confidence with the buyer. Simply help them look at here's how you're going to quantify each of these vendors. Actually help them validate what your competitors are doing as much as they are what you do. And then the solution exploration side, this is where we're really leaning into, how do we help them narrow down what they're doing? Now, this sounds simplistic, but recognize a lot of times at this stage, you have buyers that will be bamboozled by all of what they saw from a bunch of different vendors. They may get excited about new things they hadn't thought of that are now possible. The trick here is to narrow them back to the problem at hand. And if you did the first step correctly, where you help them quantify the benefit quantitatively of solving the problem, you reaffirm the problem and focus them on the key aspects of what are going on there. This narrows down who to work with and what they need to do. This allows them to share that view internally as well. Now then we get into this third-party validation. Whether we like it or not, they're going to go validate with other buyers. They're going to validate with external analyst firms. They're going to go validate with industry peer groups. And they want to establish at this point performance requirements and the must-have functionality. Not all of what you do, but the must-have things. Generally speaking, that's 2, maybe 3 things. It's not going to be the laundry list of all of what is possible. If you aren't really reaffirming 2 to 3 functional aspects of the technology relative to the problem, and then validating it with third-party opinions and views, you will open yourself up to more competition. And so this is really taking it, again, well beyond the idea of just demoing a product, but really thinking through is the trust barrier is highest with sales engineers and pre-sales. How are you helping drive this validation and relationships with these third-party resources as well? And this is where we use tools to help drive some of the data, quantification, and resources in here. So even if you don't have the relationships, we can help them access the information. How are you helping the buyer access it? And then finally, this is the comparison piece. You see implementation comes up again. You see that they're going to want comparable pieces. So now we think about how do we take looking at our product and break it down, break the functions down by person, break it down by persona. Break it down by area of business and what it means to those areas of business. Technologies do different things for different partners, different parts of a company. And remember, be proactive on security. It's missed 67% of the time. Now, obviously, as you're building out your own cheat sheet, and I would advise you to, you're going to have 3 or 4 tasks at each of these stages. I'm just giving you the flyby here of an example. Remember I said we can use guided selling and tooling to help on some of this. This is where we look at things that is creating relevancy to the buyer's stage and task. We use quantifiable data, not qualitative. In fact, when you are more quantifiable in nature and less experience-based, that is a 30% lift in terms of seller conversion. Think about that. A 30% lift simply by being quantifiable instead of qualitative. So the next time you hear somebody in your organization say, well, based on my experience, here's what I have seen over here. Stop them and just say, let's focus on what the data is that we have and that we can prove and we can share. And there's a variety of ways of doing this. Think of in terms of benchmarking tools. Self-driven demos are fantastic in the industry right now. Product simulators allow me actually not just to come in a sandbox environment, but allow me by role and function to have the hyper-personalization that I need and want to look for. And then taking those aspects and tying that into third-party content and information that validates claims. I've harped on implementation guides, so I won't touch on those again. But then also think of video and how as engineers and sales engineers, how are you scaling yourselves? Video is actually a wonderful way to do it. And it doesn't need to be Hollywood production level. Simply grab a webcam, break your acumen and your insights down into 3-minute chunks. Remembering that the average person will only watch a static video for 3 to 4 minutes at most anyway. So if you're thinking you're going to go make a 20-minute long demo video and drive them all through it, they're not going to engage. You're better off breaking it into compartments and then guiding them on how to use that internally. And then buyer playbooks. As sales engineers go, are you giving your buyers, your customers, playbooks on actually how to solve this problem? Not the product, the problem. The business situation. Remember I said earlier, business situation by vertical industry is key. Go build playbooks that allow that buyer to follow a playbook because you sell every day. They don't buy every day. Most buyers are pretty immature. And then also I want to just give you some rankings because we often in the world of sales engineering and pre-sales have to demonstrate the financial impact. And here are the ones from a trust level of how they stack up. And it's important to do the quantitative analysis with our buyers. That's what they want from engineers. The sales engineer side, they're looking to help understand the quantifiable impact. Now, TCO is actually a very important financial measure. The reason it has such low trust level is everybody builds pretty flippant TCO calculators. So they're overused and therefore they're not very well trusted. If you're building out a deeper one and really dive into business situations, it can still work, but be cautious. ROI, kind of middle of the road. Cost of delay, yeah, it's not bad. It helps move some things forwards, create some prioritization. But number 1 and number 2 are time to value and then the NPVs as well. But I would say time to value is the one that we see the most and is the one I would advise anybody to focus in on. And remember, we're trying to get to a number, 90 days and less. Now I'm going to shift gears a little bit on this here. And as we think about building this out in our companies, I want you now to think about the data intelligence layer. Because as Garen said at the beginning of this, the world is becoming more data-centric. And understanding where to invest and enable the best conversations with our clients is absolutely what we need to do. Now, for context here, Seth Mars over at Forrester did a great piece of work to show how pre-COVID and post-COVID, how conversation moments are really important. Despite how we're all very keen to get back and maybe meet in person again, the reality is that voice-based conversations virtually have actually grown coming out of the pandemic recovery from 42% to 47%. In person has actually shrunk coming out of pre and post-COVID. Email stayed pretty consistent. And so as we think about these moments, I want you to think about how pre-sales teams use data platforms now to drive buyer engagement and buyer tasks. Ask yourself in your organization, challenge yourselves in terms of how are we distributing third-party content and digital insights across the buying tasks? Are we organizing our assets by buyer task? Or do we simply have a repository of stuff that we send to people when we're trying to drive engagement? Are we thinking about how we are driving the cadence of information? There's absolutely a cadence to how buyers buy. There's a certain amount of SMSing you need to be doing at certain stages versus conversations another stage. There's certain volumes. Front of the funnel, we're going to be fairly heavy on email. Towards the end, we're going to be much lighter and we're going to be much more in-depth, customized content. And understanding that flow is really important. And automating that is key. Then understanding what content matters, like what I said at the beginning, and giving the examples of breaking down it by task and area, by stage. And then knowing, well, help the client predict what to do next. Guide them on what to do next. Don't sit around waiting for them to ask. This is where engineers can be very effective at helping improve the trust with the client to say, here's what we recommend you look at next, whether with us or somebody else. And then think through how we're optimizing the solution down to 2 to 3 things, and then how you're driving insights from other customers back to the buyer. And this is all happening through a data-driven model. And as you think about this from an interactions perspective, balancing pre-sales interactions to capture all the data and leverage the data in your organization is key. No longer can we simply rely upon our CRM tool to be accurate. You need to be advocating and building for data lakes that are looking at post-buyer situations and how those situations went down. And we get that information from potentially our ERPs coupled with our CRM systems. We look at it and then say all of the workflows from demand gen all the way through customer success. How are you extrapolating that information to identify buyer situations and moments, putting them into a data lake, discerning insights across those? Recognizing that from a customer, once you understand what tasks are done where, how can you automate the self-guidance? How can you take engineering and pre-sales engineering and not just make it a mid-funnel activity, but it's in every stage of the buyer situation is where customers want to engage with pre-sales and engineers today. They want you everywhere. We have to figure out how to help you scale. We do that by creating self-guided moments, self-guided interactions, taking the smarts of what exists in sales engineering and scaling it and making it very data-centric and driven. And then recognize when you engage as a human, 11% is email, 15% is going to be over voice, video, and only 11% is going to be in person. And breaking it down into smaller chunks. If you can get in and out of every in-person and human interaction in 20 minutes or under, you'll make your customers delighted. So think high impact, hyper-personalization, and capture everything. Don't let a conversation, a phone call, a video call, anything go by without it being recorded in some way, shape, or form. It's critical. It's a competitive advantage. It's how you help apply engineering discipline at scale. Now, I'll give you an example of this in terms of real-time guidance. Today, there are platforms that allow us to build moments of interaction to support our sellers and our engineers with the right message when they're engaging in conversations, giving them dynamic pricing push information when competitors come up, helping them understand the right balancing of investigation on a call versus listening on a call. And then talking through, here's the best practices around things that need to happen. So believe it or not, All of this can be built of moments and self-guided tools today. And we can do this as engineers. Most of us are wired that way. So when you think of scaling oneself, one's team, think about how tools will help you drive that scale. And then next, understand one final piece from the buyers. It's a multi-channel game these days. Remember I said at the beginning, these channels keep on growing. 5, 10, 12, maybe 15. If we were just selling to Bob, one person in an account, and we were going through our nice little stages from problem all the way through to consensus, it wouldn't be too bad. This Bob kind of goes like this, and if we were just doing primary engagement support, we'd have our marketing team reach out, we'd have our sales team qualify in and sales engineering, and then we'd move them up into some other basically microsites or digital sales teams we may have, and then we bring them home to a close, all with our one-to-one engagement. But that's the 17%. Remember, there's a bunch of secondary things that they do as well. These buyers are going all over to other digital assets, and they're going back and forth to things like your website. So how does your website represent you as sales engineers? What's your voice? What's your presence? How are you putting that out there? How are you engaging in sequenced activities? How are you helping build verticalized microsites for buyer situations to help scale? And again, this problem, maybe we could solve that, most of us, if it was just Bob, but it isn't just Bob, is it? It's 7+ people for deals below $1 million. It's 13+ at over $1 million. And they're coming in at different points. So understand these different points of intersection and the fact that maybe the rest of the buying group is coming along once we're already qualifying through and we've done a few demos, but they're actually jumping backwards. Well, what was the problem again? By my role and function? And then they're jumping forward. So they're going, well, hey, what should we be validating those claims and that problem before we actually proceed? And they're moving all over the place. This is the non-linear selling approach. This is why task completion is huge and thinking down that path. And so as you think about this, think about how pre-sales has distinct moments in all of these activity streams. And how are you digitizing those? Absolutely, how are you automating those? Because it is those two fundamental strategies that will allow us to scale and improve the effectiveness of our close rates. It shortens our sales cycles, right? Remember I said they can elongate as much as 2.6 months by missing certain things. So just think of all of these tasks and simply take your buyer process with your sales process, find the points of conflict or where you go, it's a little slow or a little jarring as a process, find those intersection points. That's what these triangles are. Automate, digitize, and then think of how you can support those moments in real time. And this is one final piece of a slide, and it's a doozy of a slide, so I apologize, but I want you to benchmark where you're at today. Because we can never improve if we don't know where we are. And so what we have here is what we have built out called the Revenue Enablement Maturity Map. And ask yourself, well, where are you? And think in terms of your organizational structure versus the metrics you use, the tech that you have, and then how you're enabling buyers to buy. If everything is manual today, that's already a problem. I will tell you, you're already behind the market. Most people in the market are on a tech-focused spectrum, meaning they have invested in non-integrated cross-functional tools for different buying activities and engagement activities. They've thought about dedicated enablement functions and how pre-sales and engineering ties into both enablement and also deeper into some other functional aspects, maybe some post-customer success as well. But where it's going is really into what we call the productivity side. And this is a shift towards outcome orientation across the buyer journey, not the sales process. This is the task completion I've been harping on today. This is where we're being proactive on next best action guidance. We are drawing, as engineers, the behavioral insights from the data we're collecting, recording, and understanding using the tool sets and revenue platforms out there today to do so. And then we are setting up ultimate scale across the organization. Because there's not a sales engineering org out there today that can scale one-to-one. They're always a one-to-many. So this is the automation that drives the productivity here. And then where we're going after that is the real-time insights. How do we support both the buyers and our sellers in the moment of conversation, in the moments of interaction? Not guiding and coaching downstream, but actually helping them across the task that is happening right now. And then hyper-automated. That's going to happen a little bit more downstream. That's more 2025 and beyond. And I would tell you the most competitive companies today are at level 3, level 4. They are thinking, buying, and putting tooling and data automation strategies in place to enable the productivity and the real-time side. That is where the best in class are. That is where they're spending their time. So the net is we can help both sellers and buyers buy. It's a lot to take in. There's some manual things we do up front. There's some easy things we can look at, like implementation guides. We then need to map the tasks. Then we invest in the tooling. And so my 5 recommendations as I close out here today are this. Number 1, map your pre-sales assets and content around buyer tasks. Just think of that. Take all of what you currently have in your repository and map it out. Then think of how you're engaging across multiple stakeholders. This is where we're digitizing to enable this scale, because you're only getting the 17% of time. So thinking about how we're reaching out beyond the direct one-to-one communication. And then understand that this is an aggregation of both pre-sales efforts, should be multi-touch and multi-channel. This is digital with sales, with pre-sales. It's not digital and pre-sales. Be digitally minded in all of what you do. And understand that conversational AI and demo guidance tools are the way in which we surface and contextualize the moments of interaction. And then we automate certain steps to remove the friction barrier of scheduling and engagement and everything else, right? We shouldn't always have to get on the phone. Simply guide the buyer to where they need to get to. And then think real time and think quantitative, not qualitative insights that lead buyers to evaluate the problem that guides back to your 2 to 3 differentiators. I want to thank you so much for the time. We've offered in some additional research here and findings you can go read. This is a fantastic conference. I'm thrilled to be here with all of you. I'll happily take some questions now. And just before we jump over there, as said at the beginning, this is a wonderful conference hosted by Garen and his team for free. Please donate $15 to the charities they had from each of us. I certainly will be next. So thank you so much. Let's enjoy the rest of the time, and I'll take any live QA that is out there now.
Thanks, Alastair. Really appreciate that. Just amazing stuff. I know that we have people asking about where the recordings will be. You can actually find them in the platform. In this platform, you'll be able to access the event for a period of time after this, and then we'll go ahead and enshrine those in a permanent location later. I want to get to a couple of these questions real quick. We have, not surprisingly, one of the top questions is regarding security. So Marcel asks, how can data recording be gotten into harmony with GDPR? I know that's a broad question, but do you have some initial thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I would say, depending where you are in the world, not just GDPR, but California has certain regulations. Canada has its form of it. Pretty much most regions in the world now have some form of compliance piece. So yes, so when we're talking call recordings, obviously you always have to, often you're identifying up front, but also there are some tricks to that. Depending on what law we're talking about, disclosure recording allows you to do it. If you're not doing disclosure, some people, and I'm not advocating a workaround here, but I would just tell you that live transcription of a conversation does not classify as a recording, but it gives you the same data output as well. So it's one of the workarounds that some technologies do there on that side. But generally speaking, is simply disclosure up front and off you go. Most people these days are very used to that. It's training, it's coaching, it's all of those things. Most buyers are perfectly comfortable with situations and conversations being recorded. It is interesting. ISRs, SDRs, and pre-sales engineers generally go, yeah, makes sense. When you get to field-based sales reps, oh, they raise their hands all over the place. What are you kidding me? We couldn't record this conversation. And yet, absolutely, you should be. That is where there's nuggets of information galore to be discerned and extracted and understand the buyer tasks. And absolutely, you should be. And I would tell you, the biggest tech firms in the world today, it is a default to record. It is not a position where they opt in. It's more, it's an opt-out approach at this point in time. So net is disclose, roll it straight in. Pretty much any product that would do that out there will be GDPR compliant at this point in time as well.
Fantastic. Thanks for that, Alastair. We probably have time for just one more before we have to close. Hakeem asks, according to you, what is the best way to identify the change agent who is going to be the person who will sell internally and build and create consensus among other people involved in the buying process? So identifying the champion, like what's the best way to identify that person?
That is a great question. So the things we're looking for there, largely speaking, are, well, let me answer it this way. Let me tell you the things that don't work. Simply qualifying with a potential buyer around budget, need, and timing, classic BANT qualification, is a massive false indicator. The better indicators of a champion is that they are bringing in at least 2 other people into the conversation flow. It almost doesn't matter that they are what their role and function is in the business. It doesn't matter who they bring in role and functionally, but you're looking for that multiplier person that is engaging and bringing in the broader engagement group. So, and you'll see this by when they ask for assets that need to be contextualized to another buyer and personality in the business. They're asking questions which are not germane to their department or role. And so there's all indicators that they're actually beginning to orchestrate behind the scenes different people of what's going on. So let your assets and content be your guide there. They are the earliest indicators that you have somebody that is that multiplier personality on the buy side. And then make sure that they are also bringing in at least kind of 2 other key stakeholders. That's likely going to be your primary champion that will carry the baton forwards for you. Don't worry so much about role, and don't use a BANT process period in that.
I love that. Thanks so much for that. I want to shout that from the housetops, because so often we see, the buyer process is so fraught with kind of political danger that when they put that political capital on the line and engage other people in the process, we find that that's a huge indicator as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Couldn't agree more. And I know we're out of time potentially for the questions. I know there's some additional ones. We can grab all of those. I'll happily help. I think John, you and I can meet up and we can just reply to those one-on-one back out for anybody that
absolutely
wants to after this as well.
And we're working on setting up a place where you can kind of engage around these questions and anything that didn't get answered. So there will be a place kind of persistent where we can engage around this sort of thing. So look forward to that. I really appreciate it, Alastair. This has been wonderful. So I just want to let everyone know that, we have, first, I want to once again thank Alastair for coming out. This has been fantastic content. I want to remind everybody of the upcoming sessions in a moment, and also that the last session of DEMOFEST will be full of a whole bunch of different raffle prizes. People have, a lot of our presenters have donated very generously, a lot of content, a lot of coaching, a lot of books and resources to help elevate your pre-sales team. Every session that you attend will get you an entry into the raffle to earn some of those. So you don't want to miss that final session. And that's the date and time. It's May 19th at 2 p.m. Mountain. And we are really excited to announce that DEMOFEST is going on the road. So be sure to attend our last session on May 19th to find out what cities we will be in this year. There will be in-person events. We're super excited about this. We also encourage you to stop by our expo hall to visit our premier partners of DEMOFEST. Just a reminder, there's no money that exchanges hands here at DEMOFEST. Nobody pays to be a presenter. Nobody pays for an expo hall or anything like that. This is all just people who have contributed immensely to make the event a success. So we want to encourage you to go and engage over there. And once again, thanks for joining our keynote session. And up on the screen, you'll see upcoming sessions that you can join. You can join any live session by toggling to the sessions button on the left of your screen. So we'll see you guys soon. Thanks everybody for coming.
Thanks, John. And if I could just, before we wrap up, just give a big shout out to Alastair. Thank you, Alastair. I've known Alastair for a lot of years now, and I think it's a big win for us to be able to have him start us off at the conference. So really appreciate it. And hope everybody enjoys DEMOFEST today.
Enjoy DEMOFEST. Thanks, everyone.
See everybody.
Bye.
Bye.